Hello and welcome to the Rabblecast. My name is Eric Hernandez, and you are listening to episode number 634. On this episode, we have a grab bag again of different topics we go through. I had a weird coincidence that led from J.D. Salinger to Catcher in the Rye to the unfortunate passing of John Lennon, and how that all coincidentally came about recently as far as me looking into different podcasts and stories, and I'll explain it on the episode itself. Doug is on the episode as well. He's just not here for the intro. He's tired. We're both tired. It's late. What do you expect? But don't worry. He's on the episode, and he chimes in as well with his thoughts. We go from there to, again, superhero movies and TV in general. We talk about the passing of Norman Lear and the contributions of his work to the world of TV. And we somehow managed to slip in some monster movie talk as well. We are brought to you by InsidePulse.com. You can find us under a variety of different sections: games, comics, celebrities, movies, TV, and wrestling. I don't know when the podcast link is going up. Nobody's really gotten back to me. So we'll see what happens as far as that's concerned. You can also find the show over at Rabblecast.libsyn.com. Check us out on YouTube, youtube.com/Rabblecast, or at Rabblecast, I believe, is the handle there. On Facebook, the Rabblecast Facebook fan page. Twitter, at Rabblecast, or X at this point, formerly known as Twitter. And as always, email us, rabblecast@gmail.com. Any stories, ideas, anything you want to share, critiques, we're always open to it. It's always nice to read stuff, so send it on over. Always keeps me busy, because, I don't have time for anything else. It's late. We rambled a little bit, but we had a lot of fun. So thank you for enjoying, everybody. Without further ado, let's get into it. Enjoy the show.
Rabblecast, hardly newer.
Okay. Just cold open. You caught me off guard with that one. How the hell are you, sir?
I'm okay, keeping it together. How are you?
Same. Today was one of those days where you come home from work, things are a little exhausting, a little tired. Truth be told, I just woke up from a nap because I was just that out of it today. So I was just like, oh, let me see if I can just lay down for a little bit. And all of a sudden, Jen comes into the room. She goes, it's almost time for the show. I'm like, what? I was like, oh, fuck. So I had to make sure I hopped up, got everything ready, got the boy ready for bed. Once he was all set, I saw your text and I was like, all right, I got to set up the equipment. So if I sound a little off, or if I sound a little, I guess you can say slurred, it's because I'm still trying to get my my bearings right now. But yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah, no worries. It is what it is. Yeah, all good times.
So, I had a very, very interesting thing happen. So, recently I've been mentioning how I like to read, I like to listen to audiobooks to try to fill in some time while I'm at work, especially when I'm doing electronics work. It can be a little quiet, so if you don't have something to keep you entertained in the background or something going on, it gets really quiet and it gets very monotonous. So I've been finding different books and thinking to myself, oh, what books haven't I read yet? Or what books haven't I really looked into? And it got me on a little quest of sorts of books that I guess you can say avoided when I was in high school.
Okay.
Were there any books in particular that they made you read in high school, like part of your English curriculum? Did they have books that were assigned, out of curiosity?
You're asking me to remember 30 years ago. I'm working on it. Bloody hell. I remember reading Lord of the Flies. I was relatively ambivalent. I was relatively indifferent to that one. It was what it was. Romeo and Juliet I actually liked. Although it's more of a play, but whatever. I did, but what else did we fucking read? Jesus H. Christ. I can't remember for the life of me.
Out of curiosity, did they have you read Catcher in the Rye?
No.
Interesting. Okay. For our high school, J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye was a book that I started reading, but I really didn't get too far into it. I was kind of a slacker my first couple years in high school. I really didn't
Hmm.
like turn it around probably to like my junior, senior year when I really got serious and really like applied myself. I was going through a lot of, teenage angst and other nonsense, which is funny because apparently the book Catcher in the Rye is just that. It gives you like a perspective on kids or teens growing up in the world. And it's said that if you read it when you're younger, you have one perspective. If you read it later on when you get older, at different points in your life, your perspective changes on the story.
Hmm.
So it was one of those things where like I always meant to go back to it. I never really looked into it. I've been trying to hunt it down on Audible, but I haven't been able to find a regular copy of it. Like there's a lot of like reactions to it or breakdowns of it or cliff notes, that kind of thing. But no, there's no actual audiobook. It might not be on the service for all I know. But I say all of this because for as much as I was like, oh, maybe I should look into it. There was another book called Little Black Boy. That was another book that they had us read. Lord of the Flies you had mentioned. I can't remember some of the other ones. Romeo and Juliet. Well, Romeo and I see. I can't speak already. Romeo and Juliet or any other Shakespearean work obviously were included as well. But
Hmm.
for whatever reason, Salinger's book jumped in my head, and I was like, okay. I remember the beginning of it. I read probably like the first two chapters, and I was like, let me see if I can find it. And then a podcast that I listened to called Stuff You Should Know, out of
Okay.
out of nowhere, has an episode on J.D. Salinger.
Hmm.
I was like, all right, cool. So I learned a lot about him, about his background. Some of his behavior apparently was frowned upon, if looking back in hindsight. But he's a gentleman who went to, I believe it was World War II. That whole experience like really stayed with him, and then he went on to write a bunch of different books. A lot of his material has not been published, but Catcher in the Rye being one of the books that got really, really popular for him. And like I said, depending on what time in your life you read it, you'll have a different outlook on it. And then shortly thereafter, I think it was a few days, another episode from the same podcast comes up, and it's the death of John Lennon.
Okay.
Which anybody's listening and like, what the hell? What do these two have in common?
Mm.
The gentleman who a lot of people dislike because he's the one who did the deed, Mark David Chapman, I believe, was the gentleman who killed John Lennon in front of his apartment in New York.
That sounds correct to me.
And shortly after killing John Lennon, when everybody's freaking out, everything is going on. I think there was like a doorman who came out once he heard the commotion, looked over and goes, "Do you know what you just did?" And he looks over and goes, "I just killed John Lennon." And then like apparently he just like kept to himself, pulled out a recent copy of Catcher in the Rye that he just bought and started like thumbing through it. Like the guy was mentally ill.
Oh yeah.
So if you want to look up the history of John Lennon and how that all happened, this is all to say that Mark David Chapman was a huge fan of Salinger and apparently thought this whole thing out and everything else, but he saw himself as the Catcher in the Rye for his generation, and that is
Okay.
the story of it is the character of Holden Caulfield from the book. I remember this much. Said that he was the Catcher in the Rye. He was the one who was watching the kids who were out and playing in the fields, and as they edged closer and closer to the edge of the cliff before they could fall off, Holden Caulfield would be the ones to save them so they can continue to live their lives as children, to be innocent as long as they can be before life takes over or influences whatever the case that comes along, whatever changes you as you grow up. And I'm like,
Hmm.
as this like whole timeline of events Both episodes were amazing, so I recommend both of them off of Stuff You Should Know. The hosts are Josh and Chuck, and they do the rundown of Salinger. You find all the history about him and his publishing and his dislike of the publishing world and everything else. But then it goes over to John Lennon. I'm like, wow, this is like, I guess you can use the word serendipitous in a way. Because off of the idea of, oh, maybe I should read an old book that I always meant to read, like some 30 odd years ago. That comes up. And then it dovetails into John Lennon and how that affected the world and everything else. Like, they even mentioned how there was a night of football when the news broke. So I don't know if it was a Monday night that it happened. But during whatever football game was being broadcast that night, the announcers were given the news saying, "Oh, we have to talk about this." And a lot of the announcers like, "We really don't. We don't want to." But it's kind of like their duty at that point because they're the ones on air. A lot of people are watching TV. Back then, there was only so many channels, so there's a lot of people watching the game because it's a popular pastime in this country. And they had mentioned we're watching a football game right now, and it's just that, people. It's a football game because there are more important things in life. And then they announced the passing of John Lennon. And I was just like, wow, that's the world works in weird ways. Mm-hmm. Or you just have this, like, the one thought, something comes up, and you're just like, oh, that's a coincidence. But then it continues like dominoes. And I'm just like, that left me with a very weird sensation afterwards. I was like, I was thinking about Salinger. I was thinking about Catching the Rye. Somehow that parlayed into a podcast episode. Somehow that parlayed into the death of a pop star icon. And I was like, wow, that's it's fucking weird.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, I can tell you John Lennon was shot in December of 1980. I remember that much. Day of the week, yeah, it would probably have been a Monday then. So I know it was a few weeks before Christmas. So, yeah.
It's such a weird, happenstance how this all, this timeline of events, I guess you can say, from thought to book to podcast episode, 2 episodes at that point, and it's like it left me like a weird thing. Have you ever had anything weird like that, where you feel like if you think of something like it like pops up in your purview, and you're just like, oh, that's convenient.
I'm sure it has, but I know that you're putting me on the spot. There's no way in fuck I can think of it. I did find I always was kind of interested in the weird connection, or the weird line of art that goes from Heart of Darkness to The Hollow Men to Apocalypse Now.
Can you walk me through this one?
I was about to say, you're probably wondering what the hell I'm talking about.
Exactly.
Okay, so back in, I think it was 1899, there was a book that came out called The Heart of Darkness. It was written by, bloody hell, my living room is dark right now, so I can't see up on the shelf. Joe Cabot, maybe?
Okay.
Something like that. And so anyway, the book Heart of Darkness, it's about an Englishman. He basically gets sent into the Congo to go find this guy who set up a plantation out there and was basically living as a god king over the locals, the natives that he basically had under his control. And it was basically like considered that, okay, what he's doing there is kind of insane and immoral. So, yeah, this guy, Willard, he's got to go out there and stop him. And the guy's name is Kurtz. So he gets sent out there to go basically stop him and find out what's going on, basically like keep him from really fucking anything up. I have tried numerous times to read this book. It is one of the most densely written things I have ever read in my freaking life. It is one of those ones where like some of the sentences are literally like a paragraph long.
Oh boy.
Oh, and not Joe Cabot, Joe Conrad. My apologies. So yeah, the sailor, as I mentioned, actually no, his name is Marlowe. Pardon me. Yeah, he basically gets sent in, and yeah, it's into the African interior. So this book was kind of bleak in its representation of not only like the horrors of colonialism, but basically what happens when somebody, how can I put this? Somebody becomes something, somebody decides that they're more than what they are as a human being.
Okay.
And somebody kind of becomes a monster, I guess you might say, something like that.
All right.
So this was one of the things that was influential when God damn it, I cannot remember anything tonight. Fuck balls. Um, yeah, God damn it, this is gonna piss me off. So there's a poem that came out in the 1920s called The Hollow Man. Are you familiar with it?
A poem, you said?
Yes, it's a poem.
For some reason, I'm going back to the movie with Kevin Bacon, so no, it's not ringing a bell right now with the poem.
Okay, Hollow Man was written by T.S. Eliot in 1924, a couple of years after the end of World War One. And part of the poem was influenced by his reading of The Heart of Darkness, and also there was an awful lot of disillusionment that came out after World War One, after how utterly fucking horrific the battle was, or how horrific a lot of the battles were between the loss of life, the introduction of new weaponry that was just like, you know, mustard gas was brand new, trench warfare was brand new, machine guns were brand new, tanks were brand new. This was all the first time people were seeing this. Where some people actually said, "Oh, war is fun," because it had been a while since we had a really good dust up of that scale. So a lot of people were kind of back to that idealized, like, "Oh, go off to war and prove your valor." It's like, no, this is pretty much hell on earth, as best as you can think of it. Um, so T.S. Eliot, you are more familiar with the Hollow Men than you think. The final three lines of the poem are the final four lines of the poem are, "This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but with a whimper."
Now that does ring a bell, and why?
Because that's probably the most quoted part of that poem. I was hearing that quoted before I even knew it was from that poem.
Huh.
Yeah, pretty neat.
Fucking
Um,
creepy.
it's an excellent poem. Yeah, if you ever decide to look it up or anything of that nature, yeah, it's definitely worth a read. Yeah, it's even just it's freely on what's its face. You can just look it up on YouTube, and there's people who have read it on there. It's an excellent, excellent poem. One, and I'm not a big poetry fan. But then this all connects over because then Heart of Darkness was picked up by Francis Ford Coppola when he decided he wanted to make a movie in the 1970s about the Vietnam War, and this became Apocalypse Now.
Okay.
So what happened was, yeah, he took that entire story and then he just basically retrofitted the idea of a guy who basically goes into this interior of a country he's not supposed to be in, sets himself up basically as a god king, and just starts basically doing whatever the hell he wants, like a fucking maniac. And of course, as we all know, for anybody who has never seen Apocalypse Now, the story is about Martin Sheen. Pardon me. No, yeah, Martin Sheen. He plays a special forces captain by the name of Captain Willard, and he is basically an alcoholic burnout who's just spent way too much time in country in Vietnam. I think it's MACV-SOG, which stands for the Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies Observations Group, which is basically the collection of special forces groups or special operations groups and the CIA, who basically were the ones who kind of really kind of like were dicking around in Vietnam before it was like a full-on thing of like the regular troops going in and all of that. So he gets tasked with this mission, and they basically tell him it's like, oh, you're going to travel on this PT boat. You're going to travel upriver this distance. You're going to go find special forces, the special forces officer by the name of Captain Kurtz, who was played by Marlon Brando in the movie, and you're going to go him, and you're going to terminate his command. And he just basically looks at him and he says, first off, he was like, if I go this distance up there, I'm not going to be in Vietnam anymore. I'm going to be in Cambodia. And they just look at him and say, that's classified. And he says, when you say terminate, and they look at him and they say terminate with extreme prejudice, basically implying it's like, yeah, you're not going there to get him. You're going there to kill him. You're going to go kill one of our own colonels. Because the entire thing in the movie is he set himself up with the Montagnard Army, which are the people native to the highlands of Vietnam, and it basically enlisted them to basically become his army to use against the North Vietnamese communists. And yeah, it was just an entire insane affair. And it's an excellent movie. Everybody should go watch it.
Truth be told, I have not ever seen that movie.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
It was one of those things where I would start to watch parts of it. Like I remember like some of the scenes with Marlon Brando. I remember some of the scenes with Martin Sheen. But for whatever reason I either got interrupted or like I would pass out. Like I'd never had a chance to fully watch it. To which now that falls into the category of kind of like Blade Runner. There's so many different cuts of it. Like which one do you watch and which one is the definitive version at this point?
Okay.
Because I know you and I have been talking about this for quite some time, where some of the different scenes that are involved in the movie, but then there's also the behind the scenes drama that took place and just how difficult it was to film the movie itself. So much so that there's a documentary which is just as captivating as the film.
Yes, Hearts of Darkness. Who was Coppola? Whoever the fuck she is in relation to Francis Ford Coppola. But
Okay, I think it's the
yeah,
daughter.
everything went wrong on that shoot that could go wrong, up to and including Coppola having a nervous breakdown, them constantly losing their military equipment they were using for filming because the government that owned it at the time said, "We have to go fight rebels on the other side of the island. We're taking our gear back right now." Um, but Marlon Brando showing up, and he's supposed to be like this badass, like Green Beret colonel, and he shows up 40 pounds overweight and fucking drunk as shit. Martin Sheen had a heart attack. A bunch of sets got destroyed by a typhoon that came through, so it was just a clusterfuck. In fact, the joke in a lot of the Hollywood trade publications back in the 70s was, instead of calling it Apocalypse Now, it was Apocalypse When, question mark, because it kept getting delayed so badly.
Yeah, that just, I don't know if anybody believes in superstition, but you know, a movie set being cursed has been often mentioned when it comes to different films, and that one sounds like it definitely was.
Mm-hmm.
So to have that all work against it and for it then to balloon up, and as far as I know, it was one of those movies that became very. I don't know if, was that a big hit when it came out in the theaters, or was that like more of a cult following?
It definitely was successful. I don't know if it ran into black ink or not, but it did run pretty well. It ended up getting a ton of Academy Award nominations. And yeah, it's still, a lot of people regard that to be like one of the most definitive like Vietnam films.
Kind of crazy.
Hmm. And if you're going to watch any of them, the 2001 cut is probably, actually no, you don't really need it. The original cut that came out in '79 is probably your best bet to watch. But the 2001 cut, which I can't remember the name of it, I keep trying to call it Part Deux, but that's horrible. That was the second Hot Shots movie. But the second cut, which added about 45 minutes or so to the film, a lot of the stuff they add doesn't really make a ton of sense. Because that basically adds in like when they end up at like a French plantation that's still out there, which is supposed to be a study of like when the French tried to conquer Vietnam, tried to call it French Indochina, and they ended up losing to the Vietnamese people and stuff like that. And there's another section involving like Playboy bunnies that's also just doesn't really seem to make any fucking sense. So yeah, it's not. It's. I've watched both cuts. It is what the fuck it is. The first one is probably the most concise in terms of telling you the story. I've never gotten this nuts, but according to legend, and you can find bootlegs of this if you go looking around, there's supposed to be like a cut that's like a 4.5 hour long work print. That's a little much.
Oh, good lord. Yeah, that one's always weird, especially like when you have your theatrical run, then you have your director's cut, and then there's like an extended or uncensored version or whatever the case is. But it always makes you wonder like which is the one that really tells, as you said, the most concise story. And you would think that would be the theatrical cut.
Mm-hmm.
But I know like much like Blade Runner, Highlander, because the first film was kind of direct and to the point and had a very concise ending. But they're like, hey, sequel, money. And it is
Yeah.
they wanted to try to extend the story. And the story has just been stretched out far, far longer than it ever should have been for that. But yeah, that's a whole other, I mean, we could do a whole episode on Highlander and the storyline and the atrociousness of the other movies that follow thereafter. Especially when you have a movie called Endgame and it's not the Endgame.
Yeah.
No, that's all right. So I got to look that up. And funny enough, you mentioned how I was more familiar with the poem than I would realize. It finally dawned on me where that line hits more often than not, because I probably heard it before. I probably heard it referenced in another book or another film, but I've heard it, and this is so dumb. I've heard it referenced in a card game.
Really? What card game?
Cards Against Humanity.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
It was the one subject card you would pull, and it says, "This is how the world ends. This is how the world ends." Not with a bang, but with a, and then you were supposed to fill it in with the other cards. And then often responses are Pac-Man uncontrollably guzzling cum, a bigger, blacker dick, and so on and so forth. If you've played Cards Against Humanity, which is a fun game if you have a bunch of friends around and just want to have silliness happen. It's all who can make the better joke, who can offend the person the most, whatever the case is. Know your audience when you're playing that game. It's been a while since we played that one. All right, so here's a little tip for anybody who's ever bought the game, because for a few years running, that game was pretty popular amongst our circle of friends, where most social get-togethers would devolve into a game of Cards Against Humanity. If anybody ever bought the bigger, blacker box, make sure that you get an X-Acto knife on the lid. Once you remove it from the bigger, blacker box, on the underside of the lid, feel around. You're going to feel something underneath the on the underside of the lid. If you cut just nice enough so you don't ruin the box itself, but cut a little slit, the game company that made the card game hid another card in the bigger, blacker box. And I do believe it's the biggest, blackest dick. Which had like special printing on the card itself, which is always a fun little like Easter egg. You're like, oh shit, it's been sitting this entire time, didn't realize it. So there you go. If you're a fan of the card game, go check it out. You probably have it on your shelf somewhere if you've ever played it. So enjoy that one. I know every now and then when Jen and I go to a store, we go shopping, we always go by the board game section, and there's always the variety of expansion packs for that game. They've always continued to make versions of it over and over and over again, and it's been a while since we pulled out ours, but it's always a fun time when it does get played. So, but okay, that's that's very interesting. I'm gonna have to make some time and sit down and watch Apocalypse Now.
It's an excellent film, and I also like it because it's not a war film in the sense of, you get done watching it, you just kind of feel like, damn, what the hell did I just watch? Because it is, it's fascinating in how it just kind of breaks down the essence of how war is such a dehumanizing, monstrous thing. Is one of the things that everybody keeps going back to into it. I was trying to think of it. There's a couple of really, really good scenes in it, but one of the ones that I always enjoyed was, at one point they come to this one outpost called the Dulong Bridge, and there's this one guy who's just absolutely like losing his mind, like firing off into the darkness, just screaming at the Vietnamese, like, "Fuck you, motherfucker! You're gonna come, I'll fuck you up." He's just losing his mind, just screaming like a maniac, just like shit talking like the Vietnamese. And at one point, like Captain Willard, played by Martin Sheen, he walks. He kind of wanders through, trying to he's there to get like supplies and some other stuff. And he comes up on the guy, and he was like, "Hey, soldier!" And the guy, like, when he turns around and realizes he's like an officer, he's like, "Oh shit, sorry, sir." And he salutes him. And he goes, and Charlie Sheen looks at him and goes, "Who's in charge here?" And he just looks at him and goes, "Aren't you?" And it's just like one of those, like, oh my God, how out of control is everything here? So, yeah, it's an excellent, intense film. It's there's like tons of like famous quotable lines in it. Like, the one crazy cavalry officer, he gives the classic, "I love the smell of napalm in the morning. It smells like victory."
I remember that one. Yep.
Yeah, it's such just a amazingly famous film that Yeah, it's definitely worth a watch. It's up there. That Apocalypse Now and Taxi Driver are up there for like two of my all-time favorites.
I definitely have to go back and watch Taxi Driver. It's been a while since I've seen that one. So much so that I remember watching it, but I don't, at the time of watching it, I was not ready for that kind of film. So I don't think I
Hmm.
fully like understood what was going on half the time. And then what's the other one? Godfather, actually. I've never
Ah, Godfather. Okay.
I've never sat through an entire Godfather film.
Really? Okay.
So that's another one where I would catch it bits and pieces. I'm familiar with a lot of the different scenes, a lot of the different actors that were in the movie. I have I have very shameful blind spots in my movie watching that I have to rectify at some point or another. And I always say to myself, one of these days, if I ever can like make fuck you money, I can sit back and build a theater and just watch all these films that I always meant to watch and never really got a chance to. Now, as I sit here with a family, two kids, and a wife, I have to like try to find time to not only try to consume the films that I currently like to watch,
Hmm.
which a few things pop up here and there on my radar outside of like the usual fanfare of like superhero movies. But there are other films and other film genres I like to try to catch up on. And again, because of the kids and the situation currently, it's usually the late night viewing or time where I just have to myself, which is very far and few between these days. But being able to sit down and catch something. Back in the day, Jen and I would sit together and watch a film. Nowadays, is she's like, I'm gonna go lay down. I'm tired. I'm like, all right, I get it. So we don't get to watch as many movies together as I'd like. But at the same time, some of the films that I'm into, she's probably not into sometimes. Um,
Hmm.
Especially when we were talking about like all the movies in October. She doesn't mind horror films from what she says, but it's not her go-to. And it's
Okay.
also one of those things. She's one of those people who, if she watches a movie and if it's a violent or terrifying movie, it kind of sticks with her when she goes to bed and then she has really bad dreams.
Okay.
So it's one of those things to try to like avoid sometimes. So much so that we'll usually like watch something comedic or funny or just entertaining before bed just to make it easier for everybody involved. Because yeah, some of those films they kind of stick with you after a while. You just don't want to get into it too much. Like I mentioned that I finally watched the newer versions of It, and then earlier today there was a headline saying that there's apparently it's moving into production. They're doing a prequel series of It called Welcome to Derry.
Yes.
So I was like, ooh, that should be interesting. I'm curious how they're gonna play out the story of Pennywise and whatever entity or whatever like spirit it was that came to be the murderous clown in that town. So interesting, but at the same time, it's like, oh, another thing that it's gonna be like, where when am I going to find the time to consume all the media that's currently being put out there? And I'm trying to be a little bit more selective nowadays, especially because there's so much stuff out there. It's impossible to keep up with all the different things going on. Like you have to like pick and choose, and then hopefully have the time to catch it. Like a good example, going back to superhero films, the Marvels. I've been dying to
Okay.
go watch it in the theater, and I think this might be like the last week if it hasn't been pulled already, due to performance. From everything I keep hearing, The Marvels is a fun movie. It's a fun, fast action film, but for whatever the reason, the performance of it is not doing well. People keep citing superhero fatigue, which I guess if you're not a fan of the genre, can after a while just start getting on your nerves, especially the nonstop glut of superhero films that have been coming out in the recent years. Um, what was so there was a book that I recently listened to on Audible called MCU, The Reign of the MCU. And if you
Okay.
ever want to get a deep dive, the writers of the book go from the beginning, like when Marvel was having their financial troubles, all the way to like the formation of the independent studio for Iron Man, and then it takes you down the entire journey of all the different films that came out and all the like behind the scenes and the contracts and the directors, the writers, and all. Like, it gives you like more than you could ever expect as far as knowing what happened and how those movies came to be, and how we are currently at our current point. That sounds a little redundant. Uh, how we're at right now, where the films are now starting to underperform. You know, whether that's because of the visual effects isn't up to snuff, some of the scripts have been kind of lacking, overall performance has been dwindling. You know, diminishing returns overall, and they're wondering like what's going to be the next thing, what's going to be the change, what's going to be the catalyst to try to get it back on track. Which a lot of people are saying that, look, maybe just less is more. Two to three films, and we've talked about this, 2 to 3 films a year, probably not sustainable. But if you look at it from a business perspective, if the House of Mouse, in this case Disney, buying Marvel Studios, or I should say buying Marvel Comics, and then parlaying that into Marvel Studios and everything else that it became, if you buy something, you want a return on your investment. And in this case, much like Lucasfilms and Star Wars, which Disney also bought, some years ago, you buy it and you essentially buy a money printing machine. You have your fan base, you have your films, your movies, or cartoons, TV shows, whatever the case is, your books. You have the little universe that you bought, and now you just want to try to expand it and make more money because you have all those fans that you're hoping are going to stay on track for whatever comes next. Marvel was a very good case of that. Once they took over, as far as the films are concerned, things got kind of crazy. They were making money like crazy. Millions of dollars into making films, billions of dollars coming back from the ticket sales and everything else worldwide, to the point where they're like, this will go on forever, up until movies start to underperform. What was it? Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantumania, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. A lot of the different shows on Disney Plus weren't as critically acclaimed as Marvel and Disney would have hoped, and stuff like that, so on and so forth. So now they're like, pause, let's see what happens, and hopefully we can turn this around to the point where now, next year, and again, I think we mentioned this before, next year there's only going to be one Marvel movie coming out, and it's a big one. We're now going to get the third installment of Deadpool, to which there's a bunch of different news that's being leaked or put online, whatever the case is, to the point where Ryan Reynolds himself has said, like, please stop. And then he himself started putting up different leaks, but he's also trolling all the different people who've been putting stuff up.
Oh, that's coming out. Oh, okay. I thought the next installment of Captain America was coming out next year.
No, apparently that got pushed back. See, that's the hard part with some of these films and the way their schedule is laid out. Back in November, they were supposed to start production on Blade, but that got pushed back due to different delays, not to mention the fact of, again, the writers and the screen actors strikes. But they move their schedules around to the point where they're like, okay, we'll shuffle this here. This will go back 6 months. That'll go up 3 months, whatever the case was. And once they finally stopped playing their, game of, I can't even remember the name of the actual game. Shuffling things around with the little cups and balls.
Yeah.
Follow the ball. Let's see if you can keep your eye on it. Once that was all said and done, Deadpool was going to be the only film that was going to be coming out next year.
Oh, okay.
To which, it's good. Pump the brakes a little bit, see what happens. Let that movie breathe, and maybe 1, maybe 2 films a year, and then maybe like a TV project here and there. It all comes down to like, who was it? Somebody had mentioned it recently. I was listening to something else. They were saying it doesn't matter whether you have big characters. It doesn't matter how many explosions are on screen. It doesn't matter. You're missing the whole point.
Yep, that is true.
And as you and I have talked about in the past, some of those films, especially because of the superhero genre, they always want to try to make them interconnected, or at the very least a shared universe. It's not easy to do that on a regular basis and keep the through line going. So that became more the priority as far as like, how does this connect to that one? How does this one move into the next one? you don't necessarily need to have that. If the movie or if the story can stand alone, like the very first Iron Man movie, if it can stand alone, you've got a good story, you've got a good film. People are going to want to watch it. Yeah, they'll be hungry for more, but let it breathe on its own, and then maybe like have that connective tissue, like they were doing all the different bonus scenes and the mid-credit scenes. That can come with it, but you've got to make it work. To the point where a lot of filmmakers got upset because they're like, oh, the superhero thing is just a fad. It's a phase. It'll go away. And they might be right. You never know. Martin Scorsese, Coppola, a bunch of other people have been saying that, oh, it's killing cinema, whatever the case is. Wherever you lie on that argument, it's up to you. Will it probably go by the wayside? Yeah, it might become like a smaller part of the industry, much like horror films. I'm sure at one point we'll be like, oh my god, slasher films, they're everywhere right now. We're so sick and tired of them. Okay, but then after a while, they become their own thing and continually come out, and nobody's saying like, oh, no more slasher films. No, you have your fan base. You have your fans of Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, and all the different films. And then the newer ones that are popping up. Remember the movie It Follows?
Yeah.
Apparently they're making a sequel to it.
Yeah, I heard about that. Yeah, I'm not sure what else needs to be said, but I'll check it out.
That one I'm only interested because the world that they created. If you watch the film, there's like little weird idiosyncratic routines that some of these characters have. Like I remember somebody looking at what looked like a makeup compact, but it was almost like a flip phone in a way.
Okay.
I don't know if you remember that. They had some like weird little things that were there that set it apart. That it wasn't like modern day. It wasn't our time kind of thing. I apologize for anybody who's listening, going, "All right, enough, guys. You talked about this at length." But it's interesting to see all the different things that are coming out. But then you look back and see what has come out in the past, and you're just like, how did we get from like, X amount of TV channels to like now there's endless amounts of TV channels, not to mention endless amounts of streaming channels or outlets, services, platforms. And then you look online, like everybody has their online platforms as far as like YouTube. Like anybody can create a channel on YouTube. Like this show itself exists on YouTube on a channel. And everybody has the different things. I remember the book of Ready Player One. And they say like everybody and their mother is going to have some type of like online presence, whether it be a show or like just little snippets of things that they put out there. And it's like, oh shit, like we are getting to that point. It's really odd sometimes. It's a weird, it's continually a weird world that we live in, and all the things that have come, and it's kind of hard to go back and like, oh yeah, remember the time before the internet?
It's interesting to think about, but yeah, I mean, we're kind of in that weird one of those oddball generations that really kind of straddled the line between when we were being born. There were 3 channels, rotary phones, trying to think what other nonsense that's doesn't really exist anymore.
I remember our cable box, you actually had a little slider, and the cable box was actually connected to the TV.
Okay.
So if you wanted to watch channel 2, if you want to watch like channel, arbitrary number, channel 13, and you're on channel 2, you would slide the little selector over, and as you slid it over, it would actually change the channels.
That's interesting. I never heard of anything like that. We didn't have cable for quite some years. We didn't get that till I was like 9 or 10, I think.
Okay.
I don't know how old you were when your family got cable.
I could not remember off the top of my head. I just remember the cable box at one point going, oh, this is a weird contraption. And of course, me being a kid, I'd just like slide it back and forth. I was probably like wearing out the little contacts on it.
Yeah.
Back then, TVs weren't something that you could hang on a wall. Back then, TVs were a piece of furniture. Sometimes often came with the TV and like a record player built into this giant wooden contraption.
Yeah, the wooden console that weighed about, 600-700 pounds?
Yeah, exactly. Nobody was stealing your TV back in the day. They couldn't get it out your door, much less, into their car.
No, if somebody was stealing your TV, they had a truck and they were like a fucking world-class power lifter.
Different times.
But yeah, you think about that, and then from there, what did we go to? Then we jump into, cable being what it was and videotapes being what they were and all of that. And then after that, I mean, I'm still marveling at the fact that I think it was just like about 3 months ago over the summer that Netflix said we're discontinuing DVDs, which they've been doing. They started that in like 2001.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that one I'm still like, oh man, I can't believe that. And I was still using the DVD service up to 2019.
It's funny to think what that service was initially, and that was, get your DVDs by the mail. Like, how is this gonna work? Like, this sounds like it's not sustainable. They proved us wrong. Like, they did everything they could to get that movie in the mailbox for you. But then, like, oh, we're transitioning over to digital. Like, you can know what now? And now, as I'm sitting here in the background, I have a football game on the background on our TV that's streaming off of Amazon. And it's weird to think, like, oh, digital viewing. It definitely has become commonplace in our lives nowadays. But before, you would have to wait for your DVD to show up in the mailbox. You watch it. Thankfully, no late fees. Just send it back whenever you're done with it. And then go from there. But now, just like, what the... Like, imagine that with VHSs.
Oh my God. Yeah. Just the way, it would cost so much extra for the weight of the thing. And yeah, how many tapes would have been smashed in the mail just because of how they handle them?
Exactly. Yeah. It just got, after a while, you're just like, oh, that would not be as sustainable nowadays. But the transition that we've had from one thing to the other, again, we mentioned the very few TV channels back in outings with their friends. You have to put the little RF connector in the back and plug in the AC plug and everything else. Or like the Atari that had the little forks that would go into the little screws on the back of the TV.
Oh yeah.
Set it to channel 2 or 3, or if you had like whatever like auxiliary channel, like all the weird stuff that we had to like eventually do. But now you're like, oh, like all that stuff's gone. now it's in your phone, it's in your pocket. Everybody carries around a supercomputer. Everybody has got and the ability to look up things or check things. Like if anybody ever asks, how do you spell such and such? You're like, if only we had a supercomputer in our pockets that we can just reference.
Well, somebody was talking about this recently. The era of back in the old day, when you went to the bar and somebody would just randomly say something like that, either somebody actually knew the answer to the question, like some random piece of trivia, or somebody would make something up and they would just bullshit it so well and said it with such confidence that everyone else would be like, I guess that sounds right. Nowadays, that's gone because you can get fact checked in about 3 seconds.
Oh yeah,
So that the era of that is over.
Yeah, the BS portion of social outings can be very easily debunked nowadays, to the point where you're like, I think that's how it went. Don't quote me on that one, but yeah, no, that whole thing, and especially now that means you lose that guy at the bar, that smarty pants who would always throw out little tidbits of knowledge here and there. Like, oh, you're like, now I can look it up myself. God damn it, shut up. But it's very interesting how things have gone. I'm trying to think the last time I was actually at a bar. It's been quite some time. Like, even that's, like, for me, I remember one of my brother's friends was big on going out to a bar recently. And there was, like, a little get-together, almost like a reunion of sorts. I didn't go. One of my brothers did. And I got to see the pictures online. I'm like, that's such, like, it seems like such an odd thing nowadays. I was never really a bar patron to begin with. I think the most is when we would hang out over at Danny's dad's bar.
Oh yeah.
Hang out, have some fun, and then you're like, oh, okay, we're done. It was fun for what it was, but nothing crazy. So, I do have a news story that I wanted to cover real quick.
Shoot.
And being that we're talking about nostalgia and old TV and movie and everything like that, are you familiar with the name of Norman Lear?
Yeah, he created All in the Family way back when.
He created All in the Family and hundreds of other, I wouldn't say hundreds, but like plenty of other famous TV shows or sitcoms. and was very, very instrumental in a lot of our TV viewing, especially back
Yes.
in the earlier days. So, if you'll permit me a second here, I'm going to read off of Wikipedia. Norman Lear was an American screenwriter and producer who produced, wrote, created, or developed over 100 shows. Okay, so it was over 100. Lear created and produced numerous popular 1970s sitcoms, including All in the Family, Maude, Sanford and Son, Lear Body Awards, the National Medal of Arts in 1999, the Kennedy Center Honors in 2017, and the Golden Globe Carol Burnett Award in 2021. He was a member of the Television Academy Hall of Fame. He passed away recently. Do you want to take a guess at his age?
99.
101.
Oh, no one. There we go. I knew he was very old.
Yeah, and up until the week before his passing, he was still working on producing TV shows.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
So
hey, yeah. That's why he lived so long, so you keep on working.
there was a TV show that was mentioned there before, One Day at a Time, that had its own run. It says here from 75 to 85. They did a revamped or rebooted version of that one, like a more modern take on it. And it had a Spanish family. Jen and I became really, really big fans of it because I think it was like on Netflix at the time. Eventually, after a while, it went out to other streaming platforms or other channels. But when I remember hearing the name Norman Lear, you hear it over and over again in the world of TV, especially because they would make all these shows, and a lot of these shows then would have like spin-offs or like breed other shows, whatever the case was. So he had, like, if you want to talk about somebody who had like so much power or sway in the world of television, like Norman Lear was one of those guys that was definitely up there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so weird to think that he's been around for quite so long and made so many different shows. But imagine just being able to create, show after show after show, and these would run like, probably minimum 2 to 3 years a piece, if not 5 to 10 years. So some of these shows that to go on long so long and have those under your belt, it's like, god damn, man.
Mm.
Guy fucking worked his ass off. Trying to see if I can find some of the different listings of the one. Oh yeah, he had a whole bunch of different ones. He'd say All in the Family, Sanford and Son, Maude, Good Times, Jeffersons, Hot L Baltimore. I'm not familiar with that one.
Yeah, I've never heard of that.
Mary Hartman, The Dumplings, All's Fair, The Nancy Walker Show, All That Glitters, Furwood Tonight, A Year at the Top, America Tonight, Different Strokes, Hanging In, The Baxters, Palmerston Town, and then on and on and on. He just had a whole bunch of different shows. Damn, man. I can't imagine just being in all those boardrooms, all those conference rooms going, all right, this is the show. This is the premise. And just cranking out scripts, cranking out shows left and right. I'm like, wow, that's, I don't know if we're going to quite have somebody that as big, I guess. Right, going back to the whole idea of superheroes. He was like TV's early version of Kevin Feige.
That's a good way of putting it, actually. Yeah.
It's the only counterpart that I can think of that would make sense nowadays, because a lot of these different shows or even networks nowadays, people don't last long in those positions nowadays. If something comes along and somebody doesn't like it, Warner Brothers recently, with all the different changing of hands that they've gone through between being bought and sold and mergers and everything else, if one executive has a slate of productions that they want to try to get out, they're all for it. They'll find whatever, directors or writers or supervisors. But then if somebody comes in and takes over the studio, that previous slate of productions usually gets swiped clean. If it's not, that's going to be something that's going to be guaranteed income. So a movie that was being produced will go by the wayside. A TV project that was in development for X amount of years will go away. Mostly because like, oh, if it's not my idea, I don't want to, you know, I don't want to have it on my slate. If it's a failure, it could go work against me. If it's a success, it's a slim chance, but I don't want to have somebody else's success on my slate. That kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it always struck me as kind of odd because a lot of productions kind of hang in the balance for the longest time. And if you don't have the right sequence of events, like you remember on a film production, can and will happen. So the fact that anything gets made, whether it's in Hollywood or in TV, it's dumbfounding sometimes how some of these things come out, because otherwise the amount of things that can work against you, it seems so overwhelming sometimes. It's just like, why bother? But you've got the artists who are out there who want to create and put different stories out nowadays, that it doesn't matter what insurmountable odds come against them. They'll just keep working until somebody finally says, there's no money left. You're like, oh, well, then on to the next.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Because I think you had mentioned the Tom Lennon, one of the guys. Was he from the State or was he from Kids in the Hall? He was the State, right?
The State, yeah.
Thank you. I sometimes get the two mixed up. The amount of scripts that you can write in the world of entertainment, and then you'll be lucky if one of them gets picked up or one of them gets optioned. And then from there, you're just like, hey, something hit. All right, time to write another 20 more. Because you never know what's going to hit. You never know what's just like, oh, I wrote this one script. It's great. There's no drafts, no revisions. This is perfect the way it is. And like, no. That's not the way it works. There will be revisions. There will be drafts. There will be different passes on it. By the time it's made, it's not going to resemble anything what you originally concocted. Just settle down, have fun. Here's a check. Shut your mouth. You're like, damn. Okay, if that's the way it's going to go. A fun what if. So again, because I always mention superhero movies. At one point, it was not Robert Downey Jr. attached to Iron Man. In
really?
fact, at one point, and it was being flirted with for quite some time, and I guess just things didn't come together. Tom Cruise was going to be involved and be Tony Stark.
Oh, interesting. I don't know if that would have worked.
That's what everybody says. In fact, there's usually a meme that pops around of all the different characters who would have been played differently if the movies were released in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Brad Pitt at one point was attached to Thor. When they were doing X-Men, you had, I think somebody had actually cast Gary Sinise as Wolverine. And Wolverine's had a bunch of different, like, quote unquote, potential actors. Mel Gibson at one point was attached. I know Marvel actually spoke with Glenn Danzig at one point.
Yes, I've heard that as well.
Yeah, because he had like the size and the look. I just don't think he could have pulled it off. His acting chops were probably not anywhere near what they were hoping for.
Nope.
Who else was it? Are you familiar with the name Brian Thompson?
Yes. Shao Kahn.
Yes, Shao Kahn, or he was the bad guy in Cobra with Sylvester Stallone.
I'm wondering why, as much as I love Cobra, I'm wondering why my mind went to Shao Kahn before I went to Cobra.
That's a good question. You should probably seek help for that one.
Yeah, really.
Brian Thompson at one point was actually, again, fan cast.
Huh.
And you go back to the 90s, you're like, how would have there's no way they would have been able to pull off the kind of movie that you would expect from them. Especially after you see the current stuff nowadays. Whether you love or hate current superhero films and their iterations in their transitions to the big screen, if you go back to the 90s and you try to put some of this stuff out, like, it's not going to go well. Not at all. Again, going back to that MCU book that I recently listened to, they talk about a lot of the different films that were worked on. The Fantastic Four movie that was made by Roger Corman that was never intended to be released. The Captain America film that just was utter and complete garbage. Captain America carjacks people to get from one place to another.
Yeah.
It's just not good at all whatsoever. But it was always fun to see what people would try to like pick, and it was usually based off of looks. Don't get me wrong. If you had a particular style or particular look to you, then they would say, "Oh, this person will be a great fit for this one," which would often happen, especially for the female roles in the world of comic books. They were just like, "Oh, if she a blonde, then she can be Sue Storm. Oh, is she a redhead? She can be the Black Widow." I'm like, all right, guys, let's get a little bit more depth other than just superficial.
Yeah.
But it's the world of comics. What are you expecting? I miss Wizard Comics. That was fun. That was always a treat to find out all the different things. Every now and then they'd have a little collectible card or a wall poster that you can put up, whatever the case was, and those were fun. I have my room back in the 90s had a whole bunch of those on the door, on the walls, some on the ceiling. Weird shit. So nowadays, when people complain about certain things coming out, it's just like the likelihood of it being able to come out is very unlikely. That when something does get released, you're just like, just be happy that it's out there. Whether it's good or bad, you can judge after the fact. But sometimes people like they just kill a production before it even comes out. Like, oh, it's gonna suck. Why are they wasting their time? They're wasting their money. Again, all the difference in front of the camera, the people behind the camera, they're putting their best into it. Nobody goes into making a movie or TV project and say, "Oh, I'm gonna make this suck."
No, that would be weird.
I'm gonna go out there. I'm gonna take this studio's money and I'm gonna make the worst fucking film. That's never really been said as far as I know, unless you're just that anti-establishment, whatever the case is. No, everybody's trying to make the best that they can, and sometimes it doesn't come together as you would expect, and the end product sometimes just is lacking. And again, going back to superhero films, that comes up quite often recently. See how that all pans and plays out, but Hollywood keeps on going. There's still a bunch of superhero films coming out. Star Wars films, for as much as people don't like the Disney versions of Star Wars, there's more of those coming out. I think there was a recent mention that Dave Filoni, I don't know if you're familiar with that name.
No.
Dave Filoni is a big name in the Star Wars universe as one of the creators. He wrote on the animated, the more recent shows of Boba Fett and The Mandalorian. He's been involved quite heavily. He's the one who created the character of Ahsoka Tano, who was the Padawan to Anakin Skywalker. So you have the connection between Ahsoka and Darth Vader. They had the recent Ahsoka TV show for Disney Plus, which was a lot of fun, even though a lot of people wanted to nitpick at it. And then he's recently been named, I think like they made a position for him. So now he's like chief creative person. I don't remember the actual title off the top of my head. But he's now pretty much in charge of all the different creative Star Wars stuff that is going to be coming out in the near future. So
okay.
He went from like a big fan. He's a guy who grew up watching the original films, watched the newer trilogy. So what was that? The Phantom Menace, the Clone Wars, and Revenge of the Sith. And
yeah,
he somehow made it his mission, in a sense, to make people care about the newer Star Wars stuff. Like everybody talks about the old Star Wars movies, but he was able to take the lore from the newer trilogy and even the newer still trilogy from Disney, and somehow still able to weave storylines and characters, calling back to those and like, oh no, those were fun. Let me show you why they were fun in my opinion. And then from there, he's been able to create new storylines, create new characters, create new movies and TV shows, to the point where people are like, oh no, Star Wars is still going strong. Don't quit on Star Wars. There's always that part of the fandom like, oh, it's not the original, I don't care, screw them, blah blah blah. Doesn't matter. Again, somebody's going to buy a property as big as Star Wars, spend the amount of money on it that they did, they're going to want a return on that investment, and they're going to continually put out stuff. Much like Marvel, slow it down, less is more, see what happens. But Mr. Filoni has gone on to become a big name in the world of Star Wars, and that's all for love of the films, love of the characters. When you and I sit back and we talk about like wrestling and oh, this would have been cool or that would have been nice, you know, different feuds or different storylines, that's essentially what Dave Filoni did. He just managed to somehow get a job doing it. He took all those different ideas and all those plot threads, and he started running them past the different executives at Disney and Lucasfilms, and they eventually said, "Oh yeah, no, we can do this, we can do that. Maybe not this so much," but they went forward, and now you have like all these new potential paths that this story can take. And here's a super fan that got a job doing it, and now his job is to continue that story. So you're just like, damn. How do I get that fucking job? Granted, my stories probably would not be anywhere near as adventurous or as well thought out as this guy. But if you live and breathe something like over and over again, like you will live in that world, and you will be able to see those characters and those events play out in your mind's eye, and then from there transition it to the big screen or to the small screen in the case of Disney Plus. So that's me. I'm rambling now. Anything new you watched recently, or
No.
nothing stands out?
No, I really haven't watched anything new lately.
When was the last time you went to a movie theater?
The last time I went to a movie theater, Jesus, that's a good fucking question.
Like, I know you went to watch Oppenheimer and Barbie.
That was the last time I went.
That's it?
Yeah. There hasn't been really anything that impressed me. That new Godzilla is supposed to be good, but I'm not sure if I don't know if I like Godzilla enough to go to a movie theater.
Are you talking about Godzilla -1?
Yeah, that's it. Somebody I knew went to go. A couple of people I know have gone to see it said, yeah, it's friggin' really good.
Yeah, from all the different reports, it does the balance really well of the human story and the kaijus, and having the big battles and everything else. So much so that the one headline I read was it expanding and more theaters and longer release time in the theaters.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully that's another one I might try to catch in the theaters before it leaves. And it looks really good. But apparently it puts to shame the recent films that were put out by Legendary.
Well, yeah.
Well, it's the studio that made them, so you would think that they have a handle of their characters. But at the same time that Godzilla -1 is out, the trailer for Godzilla Kong: The New Empire came out.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've checked it out, but don't get me wrong. The follow-up, the Godzilla movies, I think there was 2 Godzilla movies that came out from Legendary. And then you had Kong Skull Island. And then they were trying to do the whole shared, monster verse where they're all going to collide. To the point where even apparently on Apple TV, there's a TV show called Monarch, which is the organization that does like all the research and all the hunting of the different kaijus. Again, when am I going to have time to watch it? I don't know. But that all plays into that. If you watch the 2 Godzilla films, Kong Skull Island, and then you have the Godzilla versus King Kong movie that came out during the pandemic, and then now this one, Godzilla Kong: The New Empire, it just continues that storyline. Just like, I'm happy that these movies are coming out. I'm happy that Godzilla looks like Godzilla in these updated films, but it just seems like the American studios don't quite have the handle of these big monster movies. Like, they're so preoccupied with the human element of the story that to the point where you're like, all right, enough. I just want to see the big CG battle. Show me the big monsters duking it out.
Mm-hmm.
And people just kind of get impatient and lost sometimes. And look, I don't know how long that's going to be able to last before people are like, all right, enough of the monster movies. Because again, Legendary picked up those rights a while back. but they're making good on them. They're making more films. I would imagine you get like another one or two, depending how it goes. Because I don't know what their monster verse entails, like besides Godzilla and Kong. There's a whole bunch of list of different names that they could bring, but it's just funny. Like Godzilla minus one, which I guess is like almost like a prequel in a sense. I'm not entirely sure what the minus one stands for. I know previous to this, Godzilla, I think it was Shin Godzilla, which was like a big, like roided out version of Godzilla.
Yeah, I remember that kind of.
Yeah, that one was really popular at one point. Like, oh my god, this is the best one so far. It's like Godzilla, like lets loose. So, but yeah, all the stuff that keeps going around, people say, oh, this is always great. So, another genre, another fan base, and people just enjoy it for what it is. So, go out, enjoy a movie, have fun, fuck. What else are you gonna do? Just make sure you stop by the convenience store and pick up some candy and put it in your back pocket. Because shit's expensive nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, I think I'm done rambling. How are you feeling, sir?
I'm falling asleep. Sorry, dude, I'm an old man and a morning person these days. So.
No, dude, I completely get it. Like I said, I had to take a nap before the show started. I was like, oh, I'm that guy now. Anything else to add, sir?
Nope, I think I'm good.
All right, I think we put in the time for tonight. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. My name is Eric Hernandez, here along with
Doug.
Thank you for listening. We are the Rabblecast.